Good day, everybody. Good evening, good morning. Welcome to Reconcile Podcast. It's an honor to be here with you and to be with my guest, Sarah Jeffrey. And just want to honor that we're recording this from the local Squamish First Nations unceded territory. And it's a real honor to be here on these lands and in this beautiful place, this home, the Tantalus Wellness Retreat. And I'm looking forward to connecting with my dear friend and colleague, Sarah Jeffrey here, fellow therapist, psychotherapist. And it's interesting, before starting our podcast, we were connecting and Sarah asked, "What's our intention, John?" And we thought, you know what, instead of diving into it, because we do actually know what our intention is, we'll just hit the record button and share what our intention is for gathering here today. But I wanted to just open the space a little bit for you to share a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and then that'll get the ball rolling. We'll talk about what our intention is and we'll roll with that.
Go from there.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, John, thank you for having me on your podcast. It feels like an honor to be here, and it's always a delight to spend time with you and have some layered discussion and conversation and to connect on a heart level. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah.
Going into the unknown with this conversation. Feels exciting. A little bit about myself. My name is Sarah Jeffrey. I am a clinical counselor here in Squamish. I've been in private practice for almost 10 years. And prior to that, I had the privilege of being a wilderness therapist for a few years, using nature as a form of therapy, getting to connect with families and clients on the land, which has really influenced my perspective and my lens on how I work now with my current clients. And prior to that, I had the honor of studying at a very unique graduate school called Naropa University. It's a Buddhist-inspired graduate school of psychology. And that program was highly influential for me in terms of how I practice and how I view the world. A unique piece of that education was the mindfulness component that they brought into it. So in addition to our coursework and all the studies we did, we also were meditating every day for 3 years, which was quite transformative. It definitely allowed me to develop quite an intimate connection with my internal landscape and my emotional landscape. And from there, that's something that influences also how I work and the work I do with my clients. So that's just a little touch into my background. Yeah.
Thank you. You brought to mind something you and I have talked about before, which is the field of study and practice known generally as transpersonal psychology or transpersonal psychotherapy. And Naropa kind of had that as like a explicit, branch.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I would call it a branch. And that was the branch that I went down. So yeah, my master's is in transpersonal counseling psychology. Okay. Yeah. So I'm curious. Some people maybe never have heard this idea, transpersonal. It has a really unique sounding, combination of words together. We might think that people are interested in their personal psychology and their personality, but maybe can you say a little bit more about transpersonal psychology and what that looks like, theoretically speaking? Yeah. I'm glad you asked. I would say it is quite unique for sure. And when I was first studying that type of psychology, it didn't seem like many people at the time knew much about it or had even heard that word before. And it's interesting nowadays, I'm noticing that word is getting used a lot more, which I find quite fascinating. But if you just to start, transpersonal, what does that mean? So if you break the word down, it's got its roots in Latin, and there's two pieces to the word transpersonal. So trans means in Latin across or beyond, and then personal comes from the Latin word persona, which is the Latin word for mask. So beyond the mask.
Oof.
Yeah, beyond the mask, beyond the persona.
Yeah.
So this type of psychology is all about exploring what's beyond the mask, what's behind the persona. And it's typical for a transpersonal therapist to not exclusively do this, but it's typical to use altered states of consciousness to access what's beyond the mask. And so that could be anywhere from mindfulness, meditation, mindfulness practices, even, Qigong, yoga, things like that, all the way to psychedelics. With that said, the way I work, I think it's important to, in getting beyond the mask, I think it's important to not jump over, like I was saying earlier, our emotional landscape and go just into that kind of spiritual, mystical realm. And so where I like to work as a transpersonal counselor is in the emotional realm, versus spirit realm, so to speak. So in transpersonal psychology, there's this notion of emotional bypassing or spiritual bypassing. And my work, I like to make sure that that's not happening. So I support clients with sitting with what needs to be sat with, or exploring what needs to be explored before jumping ahead to those areas, if that makes sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That topic of spiritual bypassing along with transpersonal psychology, the word itself is circulating the atmosphere.
Yes.
Spiritual bypassing as well seems to be a word, concept, idea that's been floating around a lot more.
That's right. Yeah. Which is, it's interesting to hear that it's becoming more commonplace now. Yeah.
What comes to mind for me with that is, I get it. I get the whole idea of spiritual bypassing. You're bypassing the personal stuff. I don't need to deal with that. I'm just going to transcend through whatever ways, plant medicine, psychedelics, breath work, hydrotherapy, whatever, whatever option it is. But I guess, do you see it that actually going into, that terrain, you reference like the emotional content and experience is actually the spiritual work? Do you see it that way?
That to me does feel like the transpersonal work, at least it's the entry point, or it's the bridge, if nothing else. Also, through a transpersonal lens, there's this notion of, to kind of do away with your ego, you have to actually have an ego first. So some of that emotional work is about building up a fully intact, healthy ego before you can transcend the ego. So it does feel like an important step in the process.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that can be too easily overlooked.
Or looked down upon. Ego. There's such a negative association. But there is such a thing as a healthy ego.
Right. Which I think gets a little like less airtime.
Like
the ego, the quote unquote ego, it gets a bad rap. And the personality gets a bad rap.
Right.
But you're talking about how important it is to like build up
Yes.
healthy,
Yes.
well-functioning ego.
Yes.
And then perhaps transpersonally speaking, can then hold more
That's right.
in a healthy way and navigate life and all its complexities and
That's right.
the deepening and the heightening and the widening of all the
Yes.
direction.
Yes.
But like grounded in a really
Grounded.
human.
That's right. Feet on the ground.
Yeah.
And it's that healthy ego is the vehicle that we need to move through the world as a human in human form.
Yeah.
And it's from there that we can develop our sense of self-worth and self-love and these really imperative things to be able to do life well, and in particular, to be able to do relationship well. So if we're back to the bypassing, if we're bypassing that, we're skipping some major important pieces of being human.
Yeah. We talked a little bit in our preliminary connecting on what we might talk about in this podcast about the topic of generally, habitual patterns, potential patterns that are somewhat dysfunctional or outmoded and no longer working. Maybe they worked in a previous era or chapter of life. And the inquiry came up around how do we know when we're in a maladaptive ego, we'll use that for now, the word ego pattern. What are the signs and signals when we're in the pattern? How do we maybe interrupt the pattern? And what is like the rewiring? What does it take to rewire and grow? Grow the ego, but also, the word rewiring.
Rewire.
Yeah.
Yeah. The default mode.
So, well, anything come to mind?
Yeah. I mean, just hearing you say that, first thing that comes to mind is fortifying, strengthening our ability to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Everyone's favorite.
Yes, exactly. We love that as humans.
The ego's listening and are like cringing.
Yeah, cringing.
More of that.
Yeah. So just, developing the skill of being okay with discomfort, but also maybe even having boundaries with our discomfort, like knowing when it's too much. Because then that's maybe the opposite of bypassing. Then we're just really suffering, or we might be doing damage if we're kind of in our danger zone, So it's like finding that in-between space of growth, which only happens with discomfort.
Say a bit more about, you mentioned danger zone, growth.
Yeah.
You've shared before in our conversations this idea of our comfort zone, growth zone, danger zone.
Danger zone.
That'll, I think, help people just kind of.
Yeah. So, with any sort of self-work or growth or expansion, sometimes I think it's nice to have a little bit of scaffolding to understand what we're going through, a little bit of a framework. And so I like to look at it through comfort zone, growth zone, danger zone. Comfort zone is, metaphorically just not ever leaving the couch or not leaving the house or whatever, staying really comfortable. We're in really familiar terrain. Some people might use the language of like, we stay fixed. We have a fixed mindset. But if we want to grow and expand, we have to step outside our comfort zone. And in doing that, we bump up against discomfort. It's uncomfortable by definition when we leave our comfort zone.
Yeah.
And what can happen is we can mistake discomfort for something that's really bad or dangerous. And it's not necessarily bad or dangerous. I mean, we can use discernment around that, but it might just be a little bit of discomfort, which is, I just call that growing pains. It's uncomfortable, but it's the nature of growth. So it's about understanding what type of discomfort is okay, what type of discomfort is needed, necessary to grow. But then discerning when is that discomfort too much?
Yeah.
And when is it actually dangerous? And when I say dangerous in this regard, I'm referring to emotionally dangerous, emotionally too much for the nervous system, where it might be sending us into some sort of stress response, or even, more extreme, a trauma response. So knowing, kind of developing that skill of discernment around what is my threshold.
Yeah.
I think that's quite important. And some people, I mean, you see it often in the mountain communities. Some people really know how to suffer. They know how to push through.
Yeah.
Which there's a time and a place for that.
Yeah.
But we don't always have to push through. So it's just knowing that fine line, and it's different for everybody. And as therapists, with clients, a part of what we're holding is we're supporting them with discerning their own line, but also we're using our discernment to make sure they're not being pushed too far or too little. It's also finding the kind of co-creating that together. What is the growth zone? What does that look like? Yeah.
Anything any ways that you work with somebody, like in particular, that I feel as though what you're speaking to takes such a fine-tuned degree of attunement to a person and your own self to do that fine-tuned work. I guess where I'm curious, the piece around learning, I guess, is it learning how to be with discomfort?
Yes.
And discerning the degree of how much is too much versus.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I'm just honing in on this. It seems like a subtle art.
I think it is a bit of an art. And just the word that comes up for me is just this notion of kindness to yourself. It's like doing it with compassion, grace, kindness, self-love. So there's that piece, but kind of getting a little bit more granular. There's something to be said about, back to the piece around not wanting to bypass and like really getting to know your emotional landscape. Once you get into your emotional landscape, you're also getting into your physiological landscape as well. So really tuning into that, whether you're doing that individually or if, working with a client or something like that. So it's a bit of an art. It's a bit intuitive, but it's also just noticing, are we still in contact with each other? Is there still a connection happening here? Or has the person or yourself checked out? Are we still embodied or not? And there's subtle cues of determining that. But I would say that's some of the terrain. And then sometimes there is a little bit of a checkout. And so it's bringing yourself or client or what have you back to right here, right now. There's ways of doing that.
Like you notice a client dips out in some way. You see it on their face, their body language, or they quickly change a topic. Maybe. And part of your job, our job, is to be the mirror and with that discernment, like somewhat in an artful way, call them back in without, that might be the challenge, without shaming them as well.
Absolutely.
That's an art as well.
It's an art, and it's really natural and organic. And a lot of times the entry point is, it's through the body, it's through breath, it's through grounding, it's through your senses, back to emotions, orienting ourselves back to right here, right now. To the present.
Totally. I love that you use that word orienting. Because in the beginning of this recording, I had mentioned that we're going to circle to just sharing what our intention was for connecting. So maybe it's like in a roundabout way, I think it might be already being communicated implicitly through what we're talking about. But what's our intention, Sarah Jeffrey?
Well, what just came up for me. How about this? How to be in relationship with each other. Kind of on the grand scale. Because that's kind of what we were just talking about. How to be in relationship with yourself and with each other without losing yourself. Where's that land?
Yeah. I'm going to pause for
Okay.
a second. Let it land
Okay.
more. Hmm. Hmm. How to relate with oneself and with others without losing oneself.
Yeah.
That's a potent inquiry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's something I think that we struggle with collectively. It's a struggle. But how can we maybe have one foot in both, you know?
Yeah. You just remind me, it's a Brene Brown quote, which she says in her pretty, infamous first TED Talk on vulnerability, the power of vulnerability, which is speaking near the end about how we should speak to our children, just to remind them explicitly or implicitly that you're wired for struggle, but you're worthy of love and belonging. That stands out to me.
That's good.
Yeah.
So wired for struggle. I'm hearing in that we're wired to feel discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I briefly offer some technical, like, other concepts that hold that for me anyways, is so learning how to be comfortable with discomfort.
Yes.
Affect tolerance, to give it like a technical word. Affect meaning like the wide range of human emotion, and tolerance being, tolerable versus intolerable, and like expanding that window of tolerance to be able to hold more affect without being fragmented, and have the ego level or person level become fragmented in the experience. Ambiguity tolerance, the ability to learn how to be with more and more ambiguity and uncertainty, the uncertainties in life and so forth, comes to mind.
If there's one skill that we could develop as humans to make life a lot less of a struggle, it would be that.
Yeah.
Ambiguity, to be able to sit in that, in the discomfort of that. Because as humans, we don't do well with it. Our brains like to default to black and white.
Right.
To get categorical.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But life doesn't happen really in black and white. It's in the in-between, in the gray and the uncertainty. So if we can get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And just expect it.
Yes.
It would eliminate a lot of perplexity, but suffering.
Yeah. I'm tuning into something here.
Yeah.
When you mentioned, like, it could be any community, you reference this, like mountain community is like sort of a atmosphere of people really pushing through,
Pain.
suffering. It conjures up for me this idea, or like a way of being that's communicating in some way or another, that life needs to be hard.
Yeah.
Or life needs to be, I have to suffer, or that conjures further for me what I'm noticing more in my work these days, in many genders, but with a lot of men that I'm working with, this sense of foreboding joy, not only am I not going to like feel so much of the challenging and or for lack of a better word, but negative emotions and or painful emotions, I'm also foreboding or toning down joy.
Yeah.
And so also not feeling the aliveness and excitement and joy and enthusiasm and inspiration as much either.
Yes.
Which to me, I see that as like an expression of the affect window.
That's right.
That when psychotherapy counseling is effective, I see that opens up more.
Yes.
Opening up to the things under the surface that are like, grievous or painful or unresolved grief or unresolved trauma.
Yeah.
But also an opening to, oh shit, I can be happy.
Yeah.
And like, that's a rewiring, like letting that in.
Yeah.
Or not only just like happy or joyful, but like just content with who and what I am
Yeah,
in this moment, which I think would be a unique bridge between the personal and transpersonal. But
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, and just finding your okayness with that
right.
and amongst that.
Yeah.
How much do you suppose with that spectrum that you're talking about, where if you're dimming down or dulling the challenging emotions, naturally, if you dim that, you're dimming down the joy and the excitement and all of that.
Mhm.
How much do you suppose worthiness is influencing that?
Mhm.
I'm just imagining, this joy and happiness and
Mhm.
excitement and all those warm feelings.
Yes.
When that's getting dimmed down,
Mhm.
I'm curious how much maybe there's some belief that I'm not worthy of that. I don't
Mhm.
deserve that.
Um,
Back to your point of
Yeah.
this conditioning of ours collectively, that things need to be hard.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
things don't come easy.
Yeah.
You got to suffer to get something that's valuable,
Yeah.
you know?
I think there's a huge piece here to be spoken about on the topic of just beliefs in general.
Yeah.
Like some beliefs serve the functioning vehicle of the ego well, and some a person may discover along their path these beliefs aren't working. The way I'm operating and orienting and perceiving the world out there and in here is no longer
Outdated.
it's outdated.
Yeah.
It's outmoded,
Yeah.
which we could talk about, in some way, the painful experience of growing through dying
Yeah. Those narratives.
from those old narratives
Yeah.
they're not just cerebral stories, they're cellular,
Yeah.
embodied somatic narratives
That's
and
right.
relational, and
Yeah.
there's a whole dying of an old way of being to emerge and be reborn into something new,
Yes.
which again, there's that ambiguity tolerance or
Yes.
intolerance is like, well, who am I gonna be if I'm letting go of that
That's
old
right.
identity? Transitional space.
It's like a trust dive right there. Yeah.
I feel like I'm working with a lot of people who are in transitional space,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. That liminal in
Yeah.
between, which is incredibly uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
but it's pretty fruitful in there.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be gleaned in there.
Something I feel worth mentioning that I was tuning into as well. There's, borrowing from Dr. Dan Siegel, the interpersonal neurobiology co-founder, who talks about the mind a lot, and how the mind is like Velcro for negative things and problem sort of saturated narratives and
all that's wrong.
everything that's wrong with the world or other people or me.
Yeah.
This stewing in that.
Yeah.
And so the mind is like Velcro for that stuff.
Yeah. Suffering.
Yeah. And like Teflon, which is to say no stick for the positive. We're also like working with this mind that kind of has a seemingly foundation of that way of working. And
that's right.
I guess, and as I say that, I see how, and in my own practice, meditation and yoga practice and teaching, how developing what I've heard in other circles called a user-friendly mind that actually allows and gives space for positive worthwhileness and worthiness to come in, and like allowance, if not, for lack of a better word, it feels fitting, allowance to feel good and okay and joyful and content and safe.
Yes.
How about that?
And to even notice it to begin with.
Yeah.
To train our minds to notice it.
Yeah.
Because our hardwiring, to your point, it's evolutionary,
Yeah.
is to see the negative. It's a survival strategy. But it's somewhat outdated to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So we're not going to notice what's good unless we train our minds to notice what's good.
It's not only training the mind, I feel it's also the body.
Good point.
There's a physiology to the chronic sort of negative perception.
Yeah.
Just as there's a physiology to when you breathe into life and like receive your life and receive joy, receive the compliment from your lover, your partner, your friend, your colleague.
That's right.
Where you actually let it in rather
Yes.
than like have the Teflon response of
Yeah, the
pushing away.
constriction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the body.
That's right.
Mind, body. It's like a mental cramp and a somatic sort of indigestion.
The body, yeah, exactly. The body is so important in that regard. And it makes me think of the window of tolerance. And so the window of tolerance isn't just about being able to tolerate stressful, negative things. It's also being able to tolerate what's good and the joy and, like what you're saying, the compliments, and from an authentic place. And it, back to your point of the affect tolerance, like being able to really expand that. And I would argue that it's more about being able to expand it in the body than in the mind.
Yeah. What if any, do you see a connection to the breath with that?
I would say that's the entry point to create space.
Yeah.
To create space, and also to, the breath. I mean, a nice deep breath, a few of those in a row, will get us into our window of tolerance. It takes us out of a stress response.
Yeah.
It gets us into our parasympathetic. So it's definitely the entry point into that, I would say.
Yeah.
Really important.
Another thing that's even just coming up right now is I feel quite attuned to you in our dialogue here is what, to sound technical, but like limbic attunement.
Yes.
Just to say, like, sounds technical, limbic, emotional and or fear centers of the brain, so forth, but attunement in the sense of like, I mean, since maybe it's obvious, but do you see it as therapeutic, even as like a being with somebody who perhaps has lived a life with a very minimal amount of limbic attunement, being attuned by another person who actually gives a shit?
Yes. Yes.
That in and of itself, I'm connecting with the topic of worth. Like, oh, I'm worthy of being seen. This. And like, this person actually does care. And
they're right here and present with me. They're not rushing off.
Yeah.
I'm not getting half their attention. Yeah, the word that comes up for me when you say that is safety and security. It makes your system, the little animal in us, the nervous system, feel safe and not alone. We're tribal, so there's something in there where it's old and evolutionary, but survival. There's something to that.
What do you think? So we tuned in there for a moment to like the breath, like you can breathing, sort of taking a couple honest breath, like connects a person with widening their window of tolerance, coming out of the stress response, but also potentially maybe being seen in a present, compassionate way. At the same time, I have a branch of like empathy that's tuning into also the potential discomfort that would come up
with being seen,
and like the experience of vulnerability of being seen in this way, and somebody learning how to express themselves in their authenticity and all the different nuanced feelings and thoughts and everything. I guess I guess, back to this piece of empathizing with somebody who maybe is coming from a place that they haven't had the environment, the atmosphere of being attuned to in a safe, compassionate, present, curious, encouraging fashion, and what kind of growing pains they might have to go through to rewire the belief, like, oh, like I matter, or oh, this person really is here. They're not here to hurt me.
That's right. And to trust that. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. I think that can be incredibly vulnerable, and it makes my mind circle back to what we were talking about, comfort, growth, danger zone. We can only, when we're learning to trust, we can only tolerate so much. So there is a point, even though the person's super safe to be around, that might register as a threat, their presence. And so, it makes me think of the notion of titration, like dipping your toe in and then coming out. Talk about the weather, maybe.
Right.
But I think when we're learning to trust, there is that threshold between growth and danger. There's a line, and it's different for everybody. So becoming familiar with that.
Yeah.
Each person becoming familiar with what their line is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you find it helpful to give clients language about that? Like, does that help them or?
I think language is so important. Yes. I think if we can give language, not to label everything or diagnose things or whatever, but I think language does help make a lot of what's quite intangible a little bit more tangible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least give some parameters to what
Yeah.
could be so sound, this maybe sounds technical, but like amorphous,
Yeah.
like nebulous,
That's
and
right.
just give it some
Gives it some
edges.
shape.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Scaffolding is the word that I like to
Oh, nice.
use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just some scaffolding. It just makes it become more of a touchstone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned what sounded to be like a bit of a distinction in how people have to come to discover for themselves. And like, luckily, we have the support at times that nurtures the insights and revelations. But the distinction between threat, is this a threat versus is this actually safe or I don't know what other distinction would be, wellness inducing or
Yeah. Secure.
secure. Yeah. You can even just think of the whole system we have that's designed to detect
Exactly.
threat detection.
That's right.
But I guess on the same vein, I'm tuning into the subtleties and the nuanced potential experience of, is this a threat? Is this fear? Is this anxiety? Or is this actually excitement and like profound life force energy? And that unique individual inquiry into how a person gets to know for themselves, oh shit, maybe I don't need to be perceiving this thing as
That's
a
right.
threat. Maybe this is it's actually excitement.
That's right.
It's actually a repressed or denied desire, or I don't know.
That's right.
Many ways we could go on this one, but
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. And whether it's a threat or it's excitement, physiologically, it's the same stuff happening in our body, but the threat perception is a filter through our mind.
Right.
It's how we're judging it to be, deeming it to be.
Yeah. When I'm working with some people in whether it's explicit trauma or seemingly maybe implicit trauma responses, and oftentimes the symptom is some version of vigilance, hypervigilance towards the outer environment, relationally, even like a vigilance towards oneself in the sense of the sensations and the physiological self-monitoring that comes up in a person.
Almost like, do I even trust this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm finding more in my work that, again, this like embodied approach, somatic approach to be useful. That's a sort of
like ground up.
Bottom up kind of processing. Pausing. What are you noticing in your body as you talk about this challenging relational experience that happened a few days ago? Or tell me more about that time when you said it really stood out to you, when you felt like you could really be yourself and felt a sense of safety, and you said your guard was down. Like, whoa, tell me about that. Like,
what was that like?
What was that like? What did it feel like in your body?
Yeah.
How did you, what stood out to you? How did you behave from that place? Yeah.
Yeah.
Also giving that, I feel like in this work of counseling and therapy, is like giving the airtime for those, what in narrative therapy would be called the unique outcomes.
Yeah.
To like thicken the narratives of those and to give them their worthy, airtime they deserve.
Yes.
Just a few little things that are popping up in response to what's been said so far.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what you're talking about there, having that embodied approach, bottom up. I'm curious where that fits with what we were talking about earlier, which is having these old beliefs and narratives that we hold that kind of dictate our behavior. And where do those two things fit together as it relates to growth, as it relates to the rewiring? Because I think that a lot of times that wisdom that comes from the body
Yeah.
when we give emotions a voice
Yes.
can be in quite contrast to those narratives.
Yeah. Mm.
Mhm.
In part, what I'm hearing there is like an appreciation of the multiple intelligences that we have available to us, the
Yes.
multiple capacities we have.
Yes.
So referencing this idea of a bottom-up process,
Yes.
what's happening for you somatically
Yes.
as we're talking about this
Yes.
experience. But top-down
Yeah.
inquiry is like also look cognitively at like what are some of the potential beliefs that might be operating here.
That's right. Yeah.
And likewise from a top-down fashion, notice what's happening. Again, it's kind of this integration in the middle.
That's right.
Like there's this thought like the world is unsafe or I'm unlovable.
Yeah.
These kind of somewhat maladaptive core beliefs.
Yep.
Which may have been adaptive actually.
Exactly. Yes.
For example, to not trust in an early environment or a threatening environment would have been a profoundly intelligent response.
Absolutely. For survival.
But at 30 years old or 40 or 50 or 60 years old now at this time in your chapter of life, is that working for you?
That's right. And I think just on that note, I think it's really important, we talk about narratives and outdated narratives and, we can kind of beat up on them.
Yeah.
And with that said, I think it's really important to almost honor those narratives and even at times, depending, find the gratitude for how they have served us.
Yeah.
Because they usually develop at a younger age and there's this profound intelligence behind the emergence of them. And it's, leading towards survival at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So those narratives have kind of delivered us to where we've gotten to until we become a little bit more aware and realize, okay, these are outdated, but it's not about necessarily bashing those narratives. I think sometimes it's about, and sometimes I even encourage people to write a letter, to journal to that narrative, and thank it if they can connect with that. Thank it for what it has allowed them or how far it has gotten them, and to then give it permission to be released. So I think there's something to that. But back to what we were saying about the bottom up and then top down.
Right.
It's interesting when those two meet, there's that liminal space. There's that non-black and white area of, whoa, how does this fit together?
Yeah.
And that can be profoundly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To realize there's such a contrast there.
All
within yourself.
Honoring like immediacy, I want to ask you like the laughter that just bubbled up for you in the topic of profound discomfort.
Yeah. I guess I'm just laughing at being human, it's just wild to be a human and how layered we are, and we can take it so seriously. But when we can zoom out and see it for what it is, there's humor in it too. Yeah. Just made me laugh.
What makes I know that's a beautiful medicine of yours.
Yes.
What makes the difference then between then the viewpoint, the worldview, other view of life being a tragedy?
Yeah.
And life being a divine comedy.
A divine comedy.
Yeah.
Like
what?
It's a good question.
It's not in one moment, like life could just be like flipped and you see it in a funny, humorous way. And like, the F have I been taking myself so damn seriously? This is an absolute cosmic joke.
Yes.
Maybe I don't need to be living that way anymore. Maybe it's not so tragic. I'm really intrigued with that shift in perspective and life, view.
I appreciate what you're saying there. I think that both of those things can coexist. The tragedy, the suffering, the pain, the legitimate tragedy or suffering or pain.
Yes.
But then also, did you call it a divine comedy?
Yes.
Yeah. Which that very much exists. And like you said, it is medicine for me to be able to dip into that and not to take it lightly, but to dip into the humor that can exist. But just as you mentioned, that what came up for me is perhaps because we are so layered as humans, perhaps it's about where we're coming from. Like maybe if we're profoundly in our heart and in grief or in pain, that might feel tragic.
Yeah.
Like we might feel very heartbroken, if we're not in that space and say we're in our observer.
Yeah.
If we're able just to witness all the things that are going on, which means we're probably in a pretty grounded space in our nervous system. But if we can observe, it's perhaps from that place that we can see the humor in all of it, or the lightness. We might not take it all so seriously.
Yeah.
But it's not black and white. Again, it's not linear, it's just kind of all layered together. And it's perhaps where our perspective is coming from within our experience.
Yeah. Something that bubbled up a little earlier in our conversation that seems connected to this, again, around perspective.
Yeah.
And likely woven with beliefs, but something I've been sort of seeing and tuning into lately as well in my work is this sort of dynamism between psychological or experiential psychological deflation and psychological inflation. Something I've been like intrigued.
Say more.
Say more about that?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm gonna maybe a little bridge to psychedelics actually for a moment, which is I heard folks listening may have heard of a really wonderful author named Chris Beisch, who wrote a book called Diamonds from Heaven. That's his preferred name of the title of the book. But one thing that really stood out there in the book for me, among many things, was when he mentioned it's the topic of death as well. It comes up. Why do we need to die? In the sense of egoic death.
Yeah.
And we need to die because we're just simply the version of who we are is too small right now for who we're becoming. And there was a caveat that he added, somewhat of a caveat, or the greatest danger, though, however, when it comes to these kinds of transformative experiences, he was referencing psychedelics in this case, was he said psychological inflation. Things like the messianic complex, or you think you the savior, or and that's an example of psychological inflation.
Yeah.
But there's also this experience where an ego and a personality is sort of used to being and familiar with operating from and viewing themselves in the world from a somewhat deflated place.
Yes.
Like an ego can go both ways.
Yes.
And again, this piece around discernment, but if somebody, for example, is used to being just deflated, like the playing small or people pleasing.
Yeah.
I guess the inquiry, the curiosity is, if they are learning and growing into being more able and happy and content with who they are, they're growing, they're expanding, they're kind of inflating, they're expanding. I'll use that word.
Yeah.
And back to this discomfort, you said there's like things that can bump up against the edges of the growth zone.
Yeah.
That wait, no, these old narratives come back in perhaps as like checkpoints. Like, no, who are you to?
Yeah. Those beliefs.
You're meant to be deflated. Who are you to actually be standing in your power?
Yeah.
That's inflation.
Yes. Yeah, that would be inflation if you did that. Yeah. Yeah.
So this can't be tricky. The mind, the beliefs.
That's right.
Physiology,
the parts.
Yeah, the parts.
Like that's a part speaking.
Yeah.
Who are you to do that? And I would even challenge who is that? Whose voice is that?
Whose voice is that one saying, who are you to?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we, got therapeutic about it, is that dad? Is that, who is that?
Yeah.
It's likely an introject that's become a part. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what did you call it? The psychological inflation or deflation?
Both. Just like seems like it's a bit of a spectrum. People can go either or both directions.
Yeah. And they're both a distortion.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about what we were talking about, like we have to have an ego, a healthy ego, before we rid ourselves of an ego. And to me, the inflated or deflated ego is a work in progress to getting to that health, Yeah, that balance. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And reconciling with all these many parts and pieces.
Yes.
And, I guess now the topic of authenticity comes to my mind, is how do we know when we're, in the authentic expression of what's really, like maybe making a distinction between like a defense mechanism, which could have its own authentic
time and a place.
And something that like moves me sometimes, and I think of the idea of like living, like you are so self and life accepting that it's sort of this state or way of being that's shameless. You're no longer ashamed of being, number one.
Just being here.
Being a human.
Yeah.
And then all that comes with, I've found, in my own life experiences, or that maybe even an aspiration for self and or the world is like to be able to connect with that sense of, what I call it, love or benevolent acceptance. That's sort of a state and environment of like shameless, forgiving, accepting.
The word that comes up for me is like a surrender, not in a passive way.
Right.
Like this graceful acceptance of life.
Yeah.
In all its elements.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all our parts too. You're mentioning the reconciling.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost, it makes me think, we have so many different internal parts, reconciling, getting them all on the same page, is that a piece of living authentically, of showing up authentically? Is it about getting all those parts, not being militant with them and getting them all in order, but is it about, the image I get is this round table of parts, where they actually see each other, and understand what they're all working towards, and how to do that collectively.
That makes it like this image you present of the multiple parts and ages and different characters.
That's right.
At the table that make up the wholeness of one person.
Yes, it's complex.
And the word reconcile or reconciliation, generally like defined as to restore friendly relations.
There.
How often are we individuals, many people and the clients, we work with, living internally and likely externally at the same time, but particularly internally so conflicted.
Yes.
Like everyone at the table is arguing or shunning someone or finger pointing, blaming victim. Superiority, inferiority.
Holding back,
Some are hiding under the table.
That's right, Some are on the table.
Basement. Some are screaming.
Exactly.
Chaos.
It's chaos.
Yeah.
And that's not an uncommon experience.
No. And that family systems parts, chaos shows up in symptoms.
Yes, that's right.
Of various kinds.
Yes.
Literal, physical. To psychological, emotional, dreams, to
beliefs, back to those beliefs.
To get into like the psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology, all the connections of all those systems that show up in various like immune, functions, dysfunctions.
We're complex.
Oh man. So back to the intention and the topic of intention. We're complex. You and I both work as therapists. I also work in the realm of like transpersonal realm of therapeutic work. It's how I feel like my worldview is really deeply informed in that way. Yeah, I'm coming back to just like that fundamental question is like, what are we doing when we're sitting in the seat of teacher or therapist? Like, what's the intention? What's the goal? Yeah.
Well, the word that comes up for me, and it's the one that came up originally, is relating. How are we relating with each other, but with ourselves, back to all the different parts, how are we relating, relationship, relations?
Yeah. Yeah. And that, what comes to mind is something pretty fundamental, which in part I think I see as somewhat of like a distorted misperception often, is my humanity and who and what I am as a human being is not okay.
Yeah.
It's not normal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like in the relating can be healing. Like, oh, you mean this is
okay.
This, whatever it is okay.
Yeah.
Like I can be.
Yeah. It's radical.
In this.
Yeah.
It is radical, isn't it?
Radical. It shouldn't be, but it is.
Yeah.
For all of us. Yeah. How to show up authentically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With all of who and what you are. And all emotions.
Without shame.
Yeah. It's remarkable how like supportive it is to have the relational bridge to support and nurture the development of discernment and maturation. Whoa.
Woo.
It's a bird. I think.
Yeah, it was.
What kind of bird is it?
I didn't catch it.
Oh, what were we talking about?
Oh my gosh, yeah, boom. To show up authentically without shame.
Yeah.
And how doing that in relationship. I mean, where my mind was going with what you were saying is by having somebody bear witness to that person.
Yeah.
You're modeling something.
Yeah.
And that person's embodying something, authenticity. And being witnessed in that. I don't know if that's where you were going.
I love that you're mentioning that. It brings to mind, this notion of how important it is as human beings to have to be witnessed and to have
in our authenticity.
Yeah. And to have a sacred witness. It's like something sacred about that.
Yeah.
And the depth of meaning and
well, and a lot of times our traumas with the capital T or a little t, or our major life challenges developmentally happened with somebody, but out of relationship, like not actually in relationship.
Right.
Not in, and what I mean by that is in authentic connection.
Yeah.
The authentic connection was actually broken in some sort of way.
Right.
So then to later on go down the road of having that sacred witness, or that authentic relating, becomes incredibly healing. It kind of undoes what happened.
Right.
The aloneness that you experienced, you know.
Yeah. This makes me think of just to offer the concept, but like what's happening there is a corrective
experience. Exactly. A reparative experience.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now
and it's rewiring the system.
Yeah. Now, what system's being rewired? I want to mention this because there's something that's dawning here for me is relationship and attachment system.
Absolutely.
And the system that's unique in terms of being an individual, authentic individual.
Yeah.
This is somewhat seemingly.
Yeah.
I mean, we have one nervous system, one body, one brain that's integrated into one system.
Yeah.
But we have a unique sort of attachment style system. We have a unique personality, and you're mentioning authenticity. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on how that all works. How do I be me, Sarah Jeffrey, and not screw up this connection?
Yeah.
How do I be me and not lose you?
Yeah.
I'm terrified.
Well, there's the fear.
What if I be myself, or I say this hard thing?
Yeah.
Which is terrifying me, like, oh my God, this is like I'm scared
Yeah.
to say my truth.
Yeah.
So I'm going to swallow that
Yeah.
because I'm scared she's going to leave me.
Yeah. So that part just at that round table just ran under the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And swallow that.
That's right.
And it shows up in whatever ways.
Yeah.
Addiction.
Yeah.
Substance use.
Yeah.
Sleeplessness.
Yeah. Anxiety.
Avoidance.
Depression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anxiety, depression.
Yeah.
So here I'm just tuning in, offering like a snapshot example of, you know, things that seem common in the human experience of to preserve the attachment and relationship.
Yeah.
I'm going to sequester
Yeah.
my authenticity.
Which was a great strategy
Yeah.
as a kiddo
Uh-huh.
for survival.
Sure.
Because I'm going to do whatever I have to do to keep this person in front of me, mom or dad or primary caregiver.
Yeah.
I'll do whatever I have to do because I need to survive as a
Right.
3-year-old, as a 4-year-old, as a
Sure.
5-year-old.
Sure.
As an adult, it's a different story. So to your point, I'm going to push this aside to keep this person in front of me. Now we're in a stress response. We're in fear.
Yeah.
Now our system is in fight or flight. Now we're in a stress response. So then to authentically relate, there's some work there. We've got to learn how to regulate our system first before we can relate. So there's a piece there that comes up. There's also a piece I need to name if I'm being authentic right now. Is that when you brought up attachment system, I wanted to laugh because because there's a human condition thing. You know, we all have to deal and navigate with our attachment systems. And I'm laughing because it's universal. We all have to deal with it, and it's a part of being human, and I think it's a challenge for many. So I'm laughing in the divine sort of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it stands out to me. I think it's a unique paradox, kind of, in some ways, in that actually, when a person shares their truth, in the right conditions,
with boundaries,
and in the right, you know, which I can appreciate how difficult this is, but I guess what I want to say is like sharing one's truth or microscopic truth with a relationship or partner, whatever it is, that it actually does tend to bring people closer.
Yeah.
Which is the paradox, being that from the fearful perspective, there's no hell, what is it? Hell water.
When hell freezes over? No.
Come hell or high water.
Yes.
Yeah. There's no way I'm sharing that because it's going to sever the connections.
That's the shame speaking.
Yeah. Fear.
And the fear.
But oftentimes when, you know, somebody does share from the heart and just the truth, it's like it opens the heart and brings connection. That's right. And that's this interesting paradox. There's a paradox there where you think it's gonna, you know,
push them away.
Yeah.
But it actually allows us to relate with our humanness. It gives the other person, the listener, permission to also be human, to bring their own humanness as well. Because that's what we all want to do at the end of the day. Whether we're aware of it or not, we all just want to be human and authentically ourselves. It's easier.
Now, what comes up to my, like this theme, this notion of abandonment? Now, there's relational and attachment abandonment, attachment ruptures and attachment repair. But there's that example of like somebody swallowing their truth and authenticity. In some ways, I kind of see, you know, that might be a defense response, but in part, authenticity. So me sort of lose my train of thought a little bit.
You said swallowing.
Like swallowing
their authenticity.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning it through a lens of abandonment.
So yeah, but I guess the question I want to ask, thank you, was is that then how someone relives the abandonment that
over and over and over again
occurred before, and how they're perpetuating actually
now
as an adult where the true responsibility is to not abandon themselves.
That's right. Is to be radical and not abandon themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of that simple expression, nothing changes if nothing changes. You know, like if you don't make any sort of change, if you don't get radical, nothing's going to change. It's just going to perpetuate.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that makes me think of like the work isn't just internal. It's not just top down and bottom up.
It's also relational.
It has to be, there's like orientated action.
That's right.
Things that you know what I mean?
Yes.
You change in speech, you change in the way you speak, you change in the way you behave.
Yes.
Rather than the common pattern of just avoiding or swallowing or putting it under the rug. I'll deal with my partner's substance use problems later. That's really affecting me. I'm just gonna put it under the rug.
Yeah.
You stop. Well, that seems like a bit of a codependent pattern, but you stop abandoning yourself.
That's right.
Oh, that moment or series of moments or titrated moments.
Yeah.
I'm no longer going to do that.
Yeah.
That's a profound moment in a human adult, in particular adult, you know?
Yeah.
It's like an adult level of maturation.
Yeah. Especially when, like what you're saying, I'm no longer going to do that. And then there's action backing that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you mentioned like bottom up, top down, whatever type of processing you're doing, whatever type of therapy you're doing, you're kind of collecting information, collecting data. You're getting to understand and know your mind and your emotional landscape. And, you know, you're in the trenches doing that with your therapist, say, or whatever other type of therapy you might be doing.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And that level of awareness is step number one. That's like that's just the tip of the iceberg. Then it's getting courageous and radical and then putting that into action. And that's where it's terrifying, or it can be. It can be frightening, but that's also where the repair can happen. Because say now I'm sitting in front of you and I show up in a way that maybe I've never shown up before and you receive it well. Yeah. There's the rewiring. Right. Then it reinforces more of that, more of the action. And then that becomes quite healing. Yeah. Which is beautiful. Yeah. That rewiring. Learning safety. Yeah. Learn security. You were talking about attachment theory and attachment systems. I mean, some people are fortunate to have had a secure upbringing. Others who may not have experienced that, you know, they learn the security and that's how you do it. But it's courageous. It's not for the faint of heart. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
This is really rich so far. Pausing to let it sort of simmer and sink in a little bit more. Yeah. Something that's sort of stirring for me and part of our talk here is like, you know, two therapists talking shop and leaning into our own experience and client experience is how the work can be, I guess the word like overused, but somewhat accurate word, perfectionism is coming to mind. Oh, yeah. The topic of, you know, now I'm doing this thing called personal growth and I'm going to get this right. I'm going to get perfect or emotionally, I'm going to be an emotionally perfect being. Right. Right. Yeah. Or even to take this, stretch it even further is like it's what I'm tuning into is the possibility that self-growth work, healing work can become its own sort of trap and addiction. Yes. As well. Like and there's like another covert belief in there, like, I'll be good enough when. Yeah. Once I get to this goalpost. That's right. Or have had this many sessions or. Yes. That's an intriguing thing that's like stirring for me that I think brings a person potentially at the cusp of transpersonal. Yeah. Revelation, insights. Yeah. Inquiries. Yeah. Spiritual inquiry. Yeah. Any thoughts on? Well, it makes me think of what we were talking about earlier, where you were saying, you know, a lot of us have that belief that things have to be really hard and, you know, work
means suffering and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And I think that can also be brought into the personal growth world as well, like that it's got to be so hard and it can be endless is the thing. It can be endless. I mean,
Right.
especially in this day and age, there's just so much information out there. So that's where we need to use the discernment of actually what is resonating, what isn't, and almost to the point of perfection, knowing like what is good enough. What's my good enough?
Yeah.
What's good enough?
Uh-huh.
When am I content enough? And then giving yourself grace after that point, And I've heard people use the expression progress over perfection. I mean, there's that because perfection to me, it feels like that's a destination, whereas progress is a process, a lifetime journey, perhaps. But perfection, talking about that round table of all our internal parts, that's just another part.
Yeah.
The perfectionist. So to be aware of that.
Right.
We all have one.
Yeah.
And sometimes that perfectionist likes to be behind the wheel. But that can be incredibly exhausting. That can bring up shame. That can bring up all sorts of things. So just being an observer to that. Yeah. And finding your good enough. And always. Makes me think about like self-care or like I mentioned, grace, or like we don't have to be so hard on ourselves all of the time. It doesn't have to be so hard. Yeah. That's what comes to mind when you mention perfection.
Yeah. And you can't exactly like plan for that insight in a sense, like nobody can be forced to have that experience. Like,
the experience of,
this is good enough right now.
Yeah.
Like that seems to be such a uniquely, maybe as therapists, we somewhat create the conditions for the possibility of that being discovered.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's not like, you're not just going to tell someone you're good enough and they're going to feel it.
Yeah. You reach the good enough point. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, that's like a unique individual journey. That's everyone's in their own time.
That's right.
Find that.
That's right. And a question I'll often ask, also to myself too, is how would you know? Like, how would you know it's good enough? Or whatever the thing is that you're exploring, but how would you know? Like, what is your good enough? How does that feel?
Yeah.
What might that feel like in your body, in your cells, in your mind? Good enough. Yeah.
Have you had some interesting answers to that question over the
Well,
years?
a lot of times it hangs out at the question level,
Yeah.
like sometimes the answer comes much later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like as if the potency comes within the
with the question
itself.
That's right.
As an opening.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like to embody the question.
Yeah.
To sit with the question.
To embody the question, to embody wonder and curiosity.
That's right.
Like, oh, right. What would it be like and feel like?
That's right.
And taste like?
That's right.
Like to find my good enough.
That's right. And then when you're in that territory, you might be able to identify it because you've already been sitting with the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This journey of developing an intelligent discernment really is a journey. Like
it's a journey
in all the various ways that it's comes online, is supported, and we support ourselves in the cultivation of it. And getting to know our own biases.
Yes.
That, Velcro or push away the positive or Velcro to the negative. And
I want to say too, hearing you say getting to know our own biases, also getting to know our gifts.
Yeah.
And our value and beauty and worth or whatever, I think that's a huge piece that can often get missed as well. we look at what's, again, the negative bias, we look at
Yeah.
what's wrong with, where are we stuck versus, well, I like to have sessions sometimes where clients come in and they're like, I'm not sure what I want to explore today. And sometimes I'll say, well, what's going well? What's going well?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's radical to
Yeah.
consider that,
Yeah.
but in reinforcing the Teflon bit, trying to make the positive stick to the Velcro,
Yes.
not the negative.
Yeah.
Yeah. More rewiring there.
What do you think of, so what just came up to mind there is just another word. It's maybe from acceptance and commitment therapy, actually, this idea of experiential avoidance.
Say more.
Outer experiences and or more so particularly the inner experiences that we kind of tend to avoid or push away.
Yes. Bypass.
Bypass. Yeah. Not feeling that. What's too much?
Yeah. Resist.
Throwing up my belly.
Yeah.
Not breathe into that one.
Contract. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, experiential avoidance. Excuse me.
Which I think we're good at as humans.
Oh yeah.
I think we've dialed into that for sure. Yeah.
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 Well, maybe that's some related tangent, but as I say that, it makes me think of what Viktor Frankl spoke about, also experiential values. So on the one hand, we might have experiential avoidance, things we would like to avoid, but the values in which we would like to experience or do like to experience.
And live. Like embody the values.
Yeah. As well as attitudinal values. What kinds of attitudes do I want to live into and through?
Yeah.
Do I like being chronically cynical and pessimistic?
Right.
How does that work with my depression?
And my attachment stuff. Yeah. Experiential values. When I hear that, what I hear is living authentically. If we're living our values, if we're actually embodying our values, to me, values are almost the most important thing to orient around. They're our compass, our barometer.
I feel like I think in any literal moment, we are living a value, whether we're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
Just to add that.
Or not living a value.
That
like
too.
Being misaligned with a value,
Yeah.
So experiential values. I think if we were experiencing our values more, all of us, we would be in a whole lot of authenticity. And then with that, when we live our values, as far as I'm concerned, then we are living a life of meaning and purpose, which is what we're all looking for, whether we're naming that or not. We want meaning and purpose. And values are the gateway to that. So to live them experientially, I like that. Versus experiential avoidance, is that the ACT language? Which, again, we're good at that. Because that's us avoiding discomfort. We're avoiding discomfort. We're trying to stay in our comfort zone. Which on that note, there's a time and a place to be in our comfort zone. It's not always about being uncomfortable, but discerning, when should I push myself out of the nest versus not? Yeah.
This makes me think of with titration, frequency, how often, too much too soon, not enough, that kind of topic, and integration. But even as early on in our conversation, maybe just weave that all in there, but somebody can come to therapy for growth. Like they know they want to grow. Sometimes they might not be thinking that way. That's more like, like I'm at rock bottom. I need help.
Full stop.
It's not like about growth.
That's right.
In that moment or those moments. It's not like about growth. I'm ready to go grow.
Watch me go.
No, it's like
it's survival almost at that point. Like feeling very lost.
In it.
In it and disoriented and which way is up? I don't know. I need help. Down to the knees. Sobering
moments, whether it's substance related or not.
or not. Yeah.
The sobering up rock bottom moments, like the way I'm living right now
is not
is
working.
not working. The relationship I have with my mind, myself, my heart,
Yeah.
my relationships.
Yeah.
Like
it's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the only option is to change.
Yeah.
Which change is growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 I like to add that word change.
Change. Yeah, change. That's an option.
Yeah. Yeah.
Change things up.
Change is kind of inevitable though, too. Like in the sense that life literally is always changing.
Always.
Yes.
We are always changing, whether we have control of it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it brings to mind again that authentic willingness and courage to actually look at and participate in how you are changing.
That's right. Yeah, I would say the language I'd use for that is to author that. Because that's a choice.
Wow.
We get to author that or not.
Yeah.
But it's a choice, whether we're consciously aware of that or not.
Yeah. I love the word, just the choice of word author in the sense that it gives this idea. For me, we author, it's like in the sense of like birthing a story.
Yeah.
Literally narratively.
Yeah.
In the sense of like how you speak.
Yeah.
But like living the story.
Yeah.
That you choose.
That you've created.
You've worked through and moved into accordance with life and the values that align in more harmonious ways with you. And you live the story. It's not just like spoken, it's lived. It's every step, every interaction, every
it's
gesture.
Experiential.
Yeah.
Every
act of service that you engage in.
Yeah.
And brings to mind as well, just whether it's, we use the word authoring, but also it's like the fundamental idea of like making the unconscious conscious.
Yes.
Like living consciously.
Yes. Yes.
With or in awareness.
Yeah.
Rather than living in unawareness.
Yes.
And like repetition compulsion of repeating old patterns.
Yes. That's a lot of pain and suffering there.
Yeah, bumping your head against the
wall,
the brick wall.
Oh my
not breaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the rock bottom thing can happen.
That's right. Where you wake up.
An awakening.
An awakening.
Oftentimes, I've heard it said that suffering is often the greatest teacher.
Yeah.
For awakening.
Absolutely.
Or as Ram Dass has said, I've heard him say, like, suffering is the sandpaper that awakens.
Oof.
Like that gritty, like,
well, you can't ignore that.
No, you can try.
You can try, but man, it's there.
Yeah.
Sandpaper on you. Oof, yep.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of, and I had a beautiful session today, actually, and this like seems like a common thread that's happening is to talk about experiential values, but also attitudinal values. There's creative values too, but an attitude, let's say, of honesty. Like oftentimes what I find what kind of is happening on a fundamental level in working with people, men, women, transgender, any human being, that it's a matter of learning how and learning how and learning or discovering how to be honest with oneself, which is
radical.
Like, radical can be actually profoundly radical.
Yes.
And
it's courageous.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's courageous. It's an act of love, actually, to
yourself and the other.
Yeah, in particular to oneself.
Yeah.
Just as a starting place.
Yeah.
Especially when you're working with someone, like, what's going on for you? Like, how are you feeling in there? Like, what are you noticing about how you're living? And like, those like oftentimes can be like, not all the time, but oftentimes like very like tearful and emotionally evocative moments.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
I've just not been being honest with myself.
With myself.
I've kind of like subliminally continued to just like lie to myself and like not let myself be true and authentic with what's real for me.
Yeah. And
like that's like monumental for a lot of people.
It is. And it opens oftentimes the gates to grief, like deep grief.
Yeah. What's being grieved?
There's grief around, like it's with yourself. It's with not having honored that part of yourself.
Mm.
And no judgment. We all go through it.
Yeah.
You know, not being true to yourself, grieving that relationship with yourself.
I feel as though that those important moments, and particularly grief moments, are also profoundly connective.
Yeah.
Like that is what's happening.
Yeah.
Is you are connecting with something that has not been,
that's been broken off.
Yeah, it's not been felt in
Yeah.
internal family systems. It's an exile.
It's an exile. Yeah.
And it's like a homecoming. You're like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Like I see
you. And that's a very important piece of me that hasn't been witnessed.
To me, this is hospitality. To me, this is a moment of reconciliation.
Absolutely.
Reckoning and reconciling.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And, in grief, it comes in many flavors, but, tears or all visceral feelings.
Nausea.
Yeah. Being brought down to the ground to being humbled.
Humbling. Yeah.
The hummus, the earth of the ground, and being brought to your knees.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like what courage. I also feel like grief is a skill, actually.
I agree with that.
Grief, letting go, whether it's a loss of a loved one or your old identity dying off, like, whoa, I was this person, or in the most loving way, honoring all these defenses I had, to living such a defended life, to then that transitional space of moving from, use the metaphor, cocoon.
Yeah, the chrysalis.
Yeah. The caterpillar cocoon, and then emerging eventually as this like new being.
Yeah.
And integral consciousness, integral psychology, the notion of the butterflies transcending the old thing.
Yeah.
But the saying is transcend and include.
Yeah.
You're not leaving behind all of that.
That's right.
You're
integrating.
You're embracing.
Yeah.
You're reconciling.
Yeah.
And still transcending.
Yeah.
Like continuing to grow and become.
Yeah.
This new being, and this butterfly. The caterpillar had no idea what it was like to be a butterfly. Maybe you've wondered, what's it like to be that?
Yeah. That image of bringing the old part with you from an integrated place makes my mind circle back to where we started with the healthy ego.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, now I've developed this fully, so to speak, intact, healthy ego. Yes. And from that place, I can transcend or expand.
Yeah.
Spread my wings.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Integration. What's integration?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know. I mean, it's a word that's thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
It's a word that's thrown around a lot, in particular in psychedelic healing spaces, plant medicine, this and that, and breath work, like the field of just, I mean, I'll just add, it's my understanding as well that transpersonal psychology in practice is overtly and intentionally, you said it in your own unique way at the beginning, intentionally there to induce transpersonal experience. I think the technical word they use in the field is soteriological. Intending, like a transpersonal therapist, intending to induce a transpersonal state through whatever means. Various medicines, plant medicines, fasting, sweat lodge, deep meditation, whatever it is. The point being, the topic of integration comes up a lot. I think it's one that's less understood. It's less actually honored. I think it needs to be taken more seriously.
I agree. Yeah.
And sincerely than it does.
Yeah.
So I guess background, prefacing, and like, what are we talking about when it comes to integration? Even as simple as you're working with a therapist, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. How do you integrate what you're learning? What are you learning? How are you integrating what you're learning? Any thoughts on
I think like a kind of a metaphoric word that comes to mind is metabolizing. Like you're breaking down all the pieces, all the information, all the awareness, all the experiences.
Yeah.
And your psyche is metabolizing it. It's breaking it down, and it's taking what serves you, it's getting rid of what doesn't. And that's a process. And there's different ways of integrating. You know, you can integrate through discourse. You can integrate through, you know, being in nature, walks in nature. You can integrate through journaling. You can integrate through movement. You can integrate through all sorts of different ways with the intention of metabolizing the experience. And it takes time.
Yeah.
It's a process. It's very intentional. That's what comes to mind initially when I think of integration.
What comes to mind for me in part is actually disintegration.
Great.
Fragmentation, disintegration, disorientation.
Yeah.
Sort of like appreciating for a moment the opposites.
Yeah.
In a way, or complementary. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, just the opposites. I'll use that word for now.
Yeah.
Fragmentation, disintegration, dissolution, disorientation.
Yeah.
All the things that we tend to not like and
want. Yeah.
Chaos, rigidity.
Yep.
Integration seems to be, or offer what, actually back to Dan Siegel, he talks about the river of integration. On the banks of the river are chaos. Yeah. Living in sort of a chaotic kind of way. Systems are chaotic or rigid, like firm, unmovable, rigid. And either way, that's close to those banks. It's not integrated. It's chaotic. Or it's rigid.
It's extreme.
Extremes. Where coming into the middle brings in a flow. Integration. Use the word. Makes me think of, you know, a lot of times when people are in transition, it's an experience that can be painful, uncomfortable, fragmented, sense of loss of like self, loss of previously tethered orientating values and or like concrete tethers in the world of how I live and work and
seemingly concrete.
And like I just mean that in that sense of like the literal, like this is my work identity. And this is where I worked, and these are the people I knew.
Yes.
This is where I lived, or you know, and so back to like disintegration, disharmony, disorientation, confusion.
There's something there about contrast.
Yes.
That allows you to see it more clearly. Yeah.
What it also makes me think of effort. How much much effort do we apply in any moment? How much intention do we apply in any moment? In any context, really. But when it comes to this topic, we're talking about like overt healing work or integration.
Here's my question. How would you know that you've integrated?
That's a great question.
Right. I don't have an answer to it at this moment, but how would you know?
A sense I have some things I could offer to that would be like one of my colleagues who had on, dear friend, brother Mike Mathers, talks about VOAs, victory of awareness. When there was an old pattern, a way of thinking, being, ruminating, belief pattern that you've brought sufficient amount of intelligent inquiry and attention to, that the span of time between your catching that versus being caught by that old reactive habit of thought pattern, emotion, and so forth has decreased to the point where you have a VOA, a victory of awareness, like in
the moment, the loop is shorter.
And this awareness and shift, like not only a victory of awareness, but I don't need to have that self-recriminating, self-deprecating thought pattern. I used to have it. I see it bubbled up there. Oh, I have like space to respond rather than be in the reactive. Like that to me seems like a subtle, simple example of like an integrative moment. Like,
I think that's a great example.
you know,
when you can see tangible change
mm-hmm.
in how we're showing up.
Yeah. Or you do the hard thing that you felt the calling to. Integrative moment. And whatever that is, you lean into the vocational calling of what you were called to do. Work or a career or an offering or service. Or how else would you know? In yoga, it's my understanding, and for example, the eighth limb of yoga, samadhi, has been described generally as integration. Samadhi being a profound state of awakened consciousness, essentially, and integration of what? Like integration in or of what? Which is, this brings it to potentially the transpersonal dimension in a way. Integration of awareness itself. That here we are talking, and there's spontaneous, just awareness, holding all of it, like a witness consciousness is integrated into the human experience. And that's hard to describe. When you try to articulate, well, how would I know, what does it feel like to be integrated? I mean, when I tune into that direct experience, talking about it seems to be evoking it right now, but in meditation, it has an effect on the nervous system. I feel. But it's not only attached to the nervous system, in the sense like your physiology can be in various states. You could be connected in an integrated way. Like playfully, for example, I was at a beautiful wellness festival. Enliven Wellness Festival. And danced my face off.
Good.
God dang, that was integrative. In an embodied way. Like, talk about a physiological, like, I was just like sending it. Like full-bodied dancing, and like in a way that felt different than other times before. That like appreciated dancing in an ecstatic dance situation, free-flowing dance, and that was integration.
Sounds like you were in your body and you weren't in your mind in any way. You weren't overthinking it. You were just being moved.
And then I had shared with you before, this podcast, that I had attended a breathwork ceremony, a couple hundred people. And I chose to take it easy for this, participating in it compared to the day before. But I found myself to just be sitting in meditation and hearing much of the people around me with like trauma releases and screaming and laughing and crying and profoundly sobbing and you name it, like all over.
Full spectrum of
full
emotion.
spectrum of the human experience, basically, seemingly, and feels as though, or felt sense of an integrative moment in being present with all that is going around. And I shared with you, I had like tears of both joy and grief and gratitude kind of at the same time. It's like heart opened, present, grounded, and like, wow, what an honor to be human and to be here. And like, holy, there's like the spectrum of the human experience, and like here people in this space like doing some work for themselves and the collective as well. That felt like that was an integrative moment for me. Integrative as well, in the sense of like there's something really beautiful about that, actually. That experience, being there as like a somewhat of a sacred witness, participating, but like grounded. The topic of like allowing, I guess, comes up, like allowing the fullness of the human experience to be the beautiful thing that it is.
The word coexist comes up for me, allowing for it to all coexist at the same time.
It's something I appreciate about it. Seems integrative to me. There's also elements of the tantric yogic middle way. It seems to resonate with it, but spirituality that's not divorced from embodiment.
Yeah.
That spirituality is grounded
Yes.
and soulful
Yes.
and from like the heart
Yes.
and authentic.
Yes.
That transcendence happens, yes, but immanence
Yeah.
is happening at the same time, grounding.
Yeah.
And like,
very important.
I find that playful, but I find that that's sexy. That's alive.
Yeah.
That's
Well, it's a full experience.
Yeah.
It's not fragmented.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's embodied and it says, you know what? Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here for this.
In my program, the transpersonal program, the language we used was marrying heaven and the earth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So feet on the ground, but being
Yeah.
open and receptive. Yeah.
What's coming to mind as well is one of the Buddha statues, which is like there's like a hand on the heart, Gyan Mudra on the heart, I think, something like
Yeah.
this, or down here.
Yeah.
It's like a peaceful mudra, peaceful face.
Yeah.
But the one hand that's like this or like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is like, yes, awakening and like connecting
Yeah.
with, you know,
The human, the
self
body.
and
Yeah.
divine in the individual.
Yeah.
But don't take shit.
Mm.
Don't be a doormat.
There's a boundary there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, wait a sec. Just
Yeah.
don't be so hasty.
Yeah.
You know, I like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
statue a lot.
Yeah.
And just the
It's like, calm down.
Yeah. Hey, in a second here.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a moment, that's a pause and like an invitation for discernment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Really important. Discernment. Yeah.
We've covering a lot of territory.
Yeah. Covered some ground there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any final comments, things that you want to share?
My gosh. I mean, just what comes to me is no major insight, but just how fun it is to dialogue with you, to riff off each other and yeah, have that ebb and flow together. How fun.
Very fun.
Yeah, that's what comes to mind.
It's enriching always to speak with you.
Agreed.
I think maybe, in closing, I want to just reconnect with our intention for connecting, my intention for the work that I do, my intention for this podcast even, which, I feel as though it has been woven into what we were talking about, but I see in some ways, whether it's I'm wearing like the counselor therapist hat or here with you, in a podcast like setting, or teaching yoga, meditation, creating the conditions, the atmosphere as best as I can or we can to call in and validate and support and nurture and encourage profound, sufficient, which is to say good enough.
Yeah, good enough.
But not only just good enough, like exceptionally intelligent, multiple intelligences that we human beings have.
Yeah.
I feel as though that's what a significant part of my curious intention is for being here with you and in my work therapist hat and yoga is like I'm feeling in my bones and breath. Like I know that as I use the word this we-ness, that we have an intelligence to us that deserves to be called in more.
Yeah. Yeah. So creating the space for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Inviting it in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coaxing even.
Yeah.
Shepherding.
Shepherding. Yeah.
Sherpaing.
Yeah.
Midwifing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doula. These days. Yeah.
So much of it is about the container.
Yeah.
That we create for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. In any environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
especially of safety and security,
culturally, socially,
familially,
taking an honest account and a look at the kinds of containers or lack of
Or
containers
lack of, yeah.
that have held or not held
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
our fellow human beings,
Yeah.
our brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, grandparents,
Yeah.
grandmothers, great, 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 all the generations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I appreciate that intention of yours. Very much so. And you embody it well, creating that space, that container.
Thank you.
Not just with this, but in general, how you show up in the world.
I appreciate that reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I just feel inspired right now.
Oh, good.
In general, that I feel like we can do this.
Yeah.
Like let's do this in a sense. That's what I feel like with you and myself, and when I'm meeting people, especially when I'm teaching, it's like I see you. Like, kind of this like it's emerging in me a little bit more. It's like playful kind of part of me.
Yeah, good.
That
let that out.
Yeah. 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 More I can say on that, I guess. Just I see the parts of you that are hiding, and I see the parts of you that secretly know that you are profoundly, let's use the word like powerful beyond measure, like potent, intelligent,
insightful, wise.
Yeah. And
and you're wanting to pull it out of people.
Kind of, yeah.
Good.
But when
here,
knowing that only when and if they are ready.
That's right. That's right. Can't be forced.
Yeah.
Timing.
Yeah. Oh God, there's so much more that's like even just emerging right now. There's like transpersonal like things.
Yes.
Emerging.
Yes.
As we close.
We can do a part 2.
We probably should.
Yeah.
Do it actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the pauses. Even in my work as a counselor. Like pausing or that sacred silence for a moment. Like so much happens in the silence.
It's fertile.
The space between.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of the work that I do, part of it is teaching that actually.
Yeah.
People.
Being okay with the discomfort of silence.
Yeah.
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 To not always have to fill the space. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe we leave it at that then.
Okay.
For now.
Yeah.
Leave people in silence. You're held. Yeah. Well, it's a true honor to sit with you, to know you, to connect in this way, share on these topics of the grittiness of being human, growth and transformation. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Thank you. Sarah.
It's an honor to know you too.
Okay. Well, until next time. Thanks for tuning in. If you were listening. On camera too. Do you want to be found? Do you want to share any final things about being like found or that kind of stuff?
Sometimes I want to be found.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't.
Yeah. Yes.
I suppose, if anybody is interested in working together, they can find me just on my website, sarahjeffreycounseling.com. And it's counseling, double L, the Canadian way, Sarah with an H, sarahjeffreycounseling.com.
Okay.
We'll leave it at that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks everybody for tuning in. You and Sarah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Bless your
Pleasure to be
beautiful
here.
heart.
You too.
Yeah. And I look forward to the next one.
Likewise.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.